I desperately, desperately wish that people could understand that intellectual disability is not developmental disability, is not autism. Autism is a neurodevelopmental disability. Sometimes autistic folks have intellectual disabilities, sometimes they don't. But whether we have an intellectual disability or not has no bearing on our humanity. We're still people. We can still be communicated with. We can still tell you about our experiences and how we're feeling. It just might take a little more work or a little more creativity to do so. I would like for people to understand that none of these diagnoses are in and of themselves a monolith, and they don't happen in a vacuum. One person with bipolar disorder is going to not necessarily be the same as another person with that diagnosis. If you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, and we're all different. And right now, there are certain diagnostic criteria that are very gendered, very, very white, and very, very classist, and they prevent a whole lot of people, especially women and people of color, from getting the appropriate diagnoses and supports. And those are the same kind of problems that cause us to become traumatized by psychiatric systems that are trying to help us, like I experienced. So when it comes to being autistic or having IDD and mental illness, it's important not to mistake one for the other and to recognize that it's perfectly possible to have good mental health as an autistic person or to improve your mental health if you're dealing with other disabilities. It takes a lot of support and it takes time. I would like people to understand the relationship between our experiences, the importance of intersectionality, and especially, I sit here very privileged in a certain way, able to talk to you about these things and able to have finally, it took me many years, but I was able to get the answers and stuff that I needed. And other people don't have that luxury, whether it's because they get trapped in the psychiatric system or because they are marginalized in other ways. People become incarcerated and all kinds of things, and it's very easy to forget yourself and to be discompassionate just because you can't understand, what they're saying or how they're saying it or what's going on. Most of the time, I think that everybody carries some kind of trauma, and that can snowball into mental illness, but that we're still the experts, and we should still be able to tell our own stories, even if they're nonsensical to you. Often the act of just speaking it is therapeutic, and being received compassionately. It's so often, it's comfort or a place to land that we need. Just a place to safely process through whatever it is, or to safely have our meltdown, because meltdowns end. You don't need to medically control them. If someone's banging their head against a wall, we need to address that, but preferably not chemically. There are very specific things that I need to do to take care of myself as an autistic person that allistic people, non-autistic people, with or without mental illness, don't need to do. Some professionals might see it as a concern that someone rocks constantly or that they jiggle their leg. They might take that as an indicator of anxiety, but often with autistic people, it's the opposite. It's what's allowing us to be able to stay in that room and maintain eye contact or maintain conversation. We need time to spend on our special interests and on our passions. They can develop into problems like eating disorders like mine did, or like into addiction kind of problems. But those are times when the person needs more connection. That's happening because we need connection. We don't need to be fixed. What we need is some support and guidance and understanding. I understand that often medication might seem like a last resort, or you might seem like you've reached your last resort. It might seem like this is what the parent is begging for. But if you give a child a medication that alters their brain for life, you can't take it back. If you give a child a medication that tranquilizes them when they're trying to communicate something to you, you can't take it back. But you can always ask more questions. You can always learn more about the specifics of what a person is going through. You can really never have too much information when it comes to putting together the pieces of a person's life. Behavior-based things aren't the answer. We have to relate to people on a human level, because I think that things like medication and behaviorism feel so stifling because they're looking at the pieces of the symptoms rather than where the symptoms are coming from. They're not actually addressing the problem, which is to say that they're leaving the human being out of the issue. That said, I think that medication should also be a last resort, because often I think that even when developmental disability isn't involved, mental illness is the product of trauma and of environmental antecedents that can be addressed with the right supports, especially social supports. We need each other. It's hard when these kind of things are going on, but to give yourself or your family member or whatever it is the grace to remember that they're still human and that they're still the person that they've always been and that they're going through something. Having the language of autism changed my life. It allowed me to come home to myself, to actually contextualize my experiences in a way that not only makes sense to me, but actually lets me move through the world and take care of myself in a much better way. And if I just lived with the diagnoses that I had, I don't think I'd have a lot of the self-care strategies and things that I have, knowing that I'm an autistic person. Even with good mental health therapy and stuff, I think that having the language of autism, it's helped me find my people. And more than any medication or therapy, our social connections are what get us through the hardest of times. And just being willing to listen to a person and genuinely try to get to the root of where they're coming from is not only how you help, but how you genuinely show the person that you care. And that progress isn't linear. It takes work. Everybody's concerned about increases in stress, and increases in mental illness, and even increases in autism, when really it's that we're finding more of us and that we're understanding it better. And that can be a scary thing because we're seeing more of it, or it can be an empowering thing because now we understand more and we can communicate more about it and we can call it what it is. And there are lots of autistic people speaking up that can be resources. Our abilities change from day to day. Just like people without a mental illness might have a stressful day or be in a bad mood. Sometimes people with IDD and with mental illness can have a bad day or be in a bad mood, and it's not a product of our illness. Sometimes our bad days are a product of that, but some days we just have bad days. I think we're finding more autistic people, and I think it's a good thing. But I also think that we're over-medicalizing some things to the detriment of human connection. My undergrad capstone was on how, yes, we're overdiagnosing boys with ADHD, but no, we're underdiagnosing girls. And it's because a lot of times, especially how the DSM treats mental illness, it's all about how this person affects me, the diagnostician, or the person living with the person. And that's not a realistic representation of what's going on. And as I talked about how when I grew up through going, through my experiences in the psych system, it always felt like I just needed to be less. I needed to be smaller. But it was just people not willing to connect with me. And I think that if we were willing to create space and time for folks to do that with each other, as much as I believe strongly that we need appropriate services and supports for IDD and mental illness, I think we also need restorative justice